How should the NHS in England treat children and young people grappling with their gender identity? 4 years ago, the job of answering that complex, controversial question was given to a former president of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, Dr. Hilary Cass. She has concluded that children have been let down and that the evidence for allowing them to change gender is built on shaky foundations. Her interim report, published in 2022, led to the closure of the Tavistock's troubled and much criticised Gender Identity Development Service, known as GIDS, in London. Dr. Cass's final report today paints a picture of well-meaning clinicians overwhelmed by the number of patients coming to them.
There have been all sorts of pressures on everybody involved, and I think people at the front line in whatever setting felt that they were doing the right thing. I mean, everybody I spoke to passionately believes that they're doing the right thing. Nobody's setting out to harm children.
The NHS didn't share data on the 9,000 young people who passed through GIDS. 2,000 are believed to have had hormone treatment. And while their outcomes are unknown, Dr. Cass is clear that the drugs are appropriate for some patients. But she said there was limited evidence for the effectiveness of puberty blockers and no research on their long-term effects.
It is unusual for us to give a potentially life-changing treatment to young people and not know what happens to them in adulthood. And that's been a particular problem, that we haven't had the follow-up into adulthood to know what the results of this are. That's the reason why I've said that we must improve the research base here. So that means finding out what happens not just to the young people who go onto puberty blockers or on masculinizing and feminizing hormones, but also those who don't go on a hormone pathway. We need to know how psychological therapies help as well.
Dropping into a public debate that is often fiercely polarised, often toxic, Dr. Cass's report underlines the unknowns. Dr. Cass says there is no simple explanation for the increase in the numbers of predominantly young people, particularly girls, who have a trans or gender-diverse identity, but concludes there is broad agreement that biological, psychological and social factors all play a part. Her key recommendation is for children to receive much more holistic care within the health service.
They've often been bypassed by local services who've been really nervous about seeing them. So rather than doing the things that they would do for other young people with depression or anxiety or perhaps undiagnosed autistic spectrum disorder, they've tended to pass them straight on to the GID service, and they then ended up at the back of a very long waiting list because GIDS wasn't really able to cope with the rising numbers and the complexity of their presentations.
At the heart of this debate are children and their parents, young people often in distress and those looking after them. As Dr. Cass has said, the toxicity of the issue is exceptional. Society's conversation about this is polarised and its children caught in the middle. Earlier, I spoke to a husband and wife who have a 16-year-old on the waiting list for gender treatment. Their child was born a girl, is autistic and has ADHD, and is attracted to the same sex.
Our story kind of starts in lockdown, really. Our daughter, she was 12. We'd been in lockdown about a year at this point, I think it was.
Yeah, thereabouts.
And she very much out of the blue declared to us in a letter that first of all she was non-binary and then that she was trans, that she identified as a boy.
Yeah.
At this point had shown no discomfort or unhappiness in her body or with being a girl.
No, and we've always made a point in her upbringing of pointing out how we don't think gender roles apply. You do what you want to do. So,
we've never been a family that has enforced rigid gender stereotypes or anything like that. So when she suddenly revealed in a letter, which to us didn't read as if she'd written it, felt quite scripted. But when she said this, it was a big shock to us.
And what did the letter say?
Essentially, it said that
this is me
now, and if you can't accept me as I am, then you will lose me forever.
say goodbye to any affection.
Yeah,
Something like we don't have a copy of it, but that's
yeah.
paraphrasing
She took it back, but
It must have been quite terrifying as parents to receive that letter.
yeah. I mean, I felt like the bottom drop out of my world. You know, there was quite a clear narrative about what these children, what this scenario looks like, and for us that didn't fit at all. It was completely, it seemed completely out of the blue.
And what was your initial instinct for how to handle this?
I saw the key thing as we love you no matter what. It's down to you to figure out your identity.
It's important that your child knew their feelings were being heard by their parents.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's actually quite an important point, is that whether you believe some children are genuinely born in the wrong body, or whether you believe that's impossible, and that surgery isn't a solution to mental confusion, I think you've got to accept that there are real children experiencing very real things. They may not have a full understanding of what it is that they're experiencing. They may be attributing it to the wrong causes.
Yeah, but where it comes from in that sense is irrelevant. They're still feeling distress and need
and
help,
they need support, and that really mustn't be lost.
So at what point did you turn to the NHS? How did you go about finding support? And what was your experience?
So we sought advice relatively quickly.
The GP essentially said, "This is all new to me as well. I know that some kids find that it helps them psychologically, and essentially that it was really not, it didn't say a personal choice, but it was kind of down to us to figure out whether the risks outweighed the benefits."
Whilst also not being able to really give us any evidence either way of what the risks and benefits were.
And how did your initial meeting then with the GP sort of escalate into further contact with the health service?
So that was a fairly kind of standalone call. I think our next contact was after we'd had that conversation about the suicide attempt. We had some quite heated conversations, not really arguments, with our daughter, and she revealed that she blurted out really, "Oh well, I've already tried to kill myself several times in the last year or last 6 months," or something like that, which was obviously
horrifying,
extremely worrying and upsetting. We took that very seriously, and we contacted the GP again then, and the GP contacted social services.
And what did social services say to you?
When we received the report, which was emailed to us and to our daughter, directly to our daughter, it contained statements saying that, our dear child, you are a 13-year-old male born into a female body, which to me is very ideological statement being presented as fact by social services, and directly to a vulnerable child who will believe what they are told. And it then followed up with the advice saying essentially that that the issue was our arguing, and saying that our child's gender identity is not something that we need to discuss.
And what impact did that have at that moment on your relationship with your child?
It stifled us.
Yeah.
It completely put the kibosh on any opportunity we may have had to discuss the issue with our daughter anymore. We were essentially told, if you try and talk to her about this, if you try and understand what's going on, you will be the cause of her death. I feared that if we didn't go along with the silencing order, is what I felt we had just received from social services. If we didn't go along with that, I could, and my daughter contacted social services and said, I've got a complaint about this, perhaps we could lose custody. If the GP didn't feel we were affirming enough, perhaps we could lose custody. It was absolutely terrifying.
It sounds that you feel that any questions or skepticism you had about potential treatment, the approach that the NHS was taking, those concerns were smothered, were they, during your conversations?
Absolutely, yeah. But I mean, certainly, I also was. I joined a Facebook group for parents of kids who identify as being trans, and Hannah Barnes' book on the Tavistock was coming out, and a lot of the parents in there were had children at the Tavistock or on the waiting list. I thought, well, actually, this is a group I really want to discuss this with, and so I actually spoke to the admins because I realised it might be contentious. I said, can I post about this? And so with their permission, I made a post about the book and said, I take a very light touch with these things. And I said, look, I realise this might not be something I want to engage with, but what do you think about this? And the response was very quickly, well, I wouldn't read anything that transphobe has written. And the next thing I knew, I'd been ejected from the group. And I heard from someone else that I know that was still in the group that they told the group that I'd been ejected for reading transphobic material.
When we go to the GP and say, tell us your expertise, and the GP says, I have none, go away and ask parent support groups. And we were directed to Mermaids and Stonewall and the like, and you go and you look and you try and find the evidence. And as my husband mentioned with the support groups, you try and find out how other people are making their decisions. And for asking the simplest of questions, you are silenced, you are branded hateful, you are branded a bigot, and in many cases told that you deserve to have your child hate you, disown you, never talk to you again, and and even die. It would serve you right if your child killed themselves, I've been told. It's I feel completely I have been completely let down, completely at sea by the so-called experts. They've completely failed.
Yeah. Today's report
to support my daughter.
Sorry to interrupt you. No, today's report by Dr. Hilary Cass says there must now be a much more holistic approach in the way that the NHS approaches children like yours. What do you think of her recommendations?
I think on the whole, she has done a very good job of setting out the need for a sound evidence-based approach, which is astonishing that needs to be reiterated. The need for this holistic care, looking at the comorbid factors, looking at what's driving children to experience this distress. And I think
noting the difference in demographics and the shift towards female adolescents, whereas before it was heavily
prepubescent boys,
because again we if you tried to ask the questions, why are so many of these kids autistic? Why are so many of them teenage girls now?
Why are so many of them seemingly same-sex attracted?
Those again were questions that were crushed. So to see those being highlighted in the report is, it feels to some extent like some vindication that actually we were raising reasonable questions. We weren't transphobic bigots. We were asking perfectly reasonable things.
Dr. Cass recommends that young people should have continuing care until they're 25 instead of being transferred to adult clinics at 17. Your child is 16, aren't they?
Yes.
What's happening now with them? And what do you feel about the prospect of them going into the adult system?
Oh, I'm terrified of the thought of them entering adult services, which we already know don't have the same safeguards in place as even the existing gender services, children's services, let alone the level of safeguards that should be in place after the full Cass review. So for me, the prospect of her going into adult services is absolutely terrifying. My daughter is on the line here. All I can hope, and this again, I can't believe I'm saying this, all I can hope is that the waiting list remains so long, she never, ever gets seen, because I have absolutely no faith
in what's there
in
at the
what
moment.
is there at the moment, or that what will, with the best will in the world, that all the recommendations that Cass has made, that they will be put in place in time and in the right
Yeah.
places to actually help my child.
The experience of two parents who we spoke to anonymously to protect the identity of their child. About 5,000 young people are currently waiting for referrals. NHS England is now rolling out a number of regional treatment hubs and has changed its guidelines for administering drugs that stop puberty. Dr. Aidan Kelly worked in gender services in the NHS for nearly a decade. He's now clinical director at Gender Plus, a private clinic offering specialist multidisciplinary-based gender assessment, support and treatment services. They're already operating within NHS guidelines and only offer hormone treatment to those over 16. I asked him if the lack of evidence available on this kind of treatment meant that clinicians were flying blind.
I wouldn't quite say I wouldn't quite agree with that, to say that we're flying blind. I do think we need to build a better evidence base. I do agree with that. More research, more evidence can only be a good thing. I guess what I would say is that in an ideal world, we'd have evidence informing practice, but there's also evidence that we gain from doing the work itself. And that's something what we might call practice-based evidence. And so we do pick up evidence and from the expertise of people who've been doing this for quite a long period of time. And that doesn't mean that we don't remain cautious and careful around how we do it. And so I think it's important that we both try to build up the evidence base, but while at the same time, that evidence base might take, 10 plus years to build up to meet the kind of level of the standard of evidence that Dr. Cass is looking for. But in the meantime, we need to do something. We need to support these people in a careful, considered way.
Isn't the danger, though, while we wait for that evidence to be provided, that people in your profession are encouraging children to change their identity, that it's affirming the choice they want to make right the way through the process? That was certainly the testimony from parents that we've been speaking to.
Healthcare needs to be neutral. We would never encourage anyone to identify in one way or the other, whether that's as a trans identity or not a trans identity. I don't think even if we did do that, it would be very effective. Young people kind of know their own minds and take time, and we want them to take time to consider these quite big decisions. We're also aware that lots of people identify as transgender but don't access healthcare. That doesn't kind of medical healthcare, so that doesn't kind of diminish their identity. So I think that's not borne out by the evidence that there's long wait times, long comprehensive assessment processes. And actually, one of the things that Hilary Cass did recognise in the report was that actually GIDS pre-2020 was more conservative than its international colleagues in terms of the numbers of those that post-assessment ever got referred for hormone treatment. And so I think Dr. Cass pointed out around the mid-20, about 25%, something like that ever did an assessment, ever got referred for hormone treatment, whereas international gender services in doing similar work in different countries were referring at a much higher rate. So I don't accept the idea that things were, rushed through or many people were put on treatments inappropriately.
Dr. Cass talked about the toxicity around this whole issue, that it inhibits debate, shuts down conversations. Do you recognise that, and why has it happened?
I absolutely recognise it, and I think that's one of the most important things to come out of this review: the recognition of the toxicity, the polarisation within this area of healthcare. It's incredibly unhelpful, and it set us back in 3.5 years since this review was commissioned. We're actually now in a far worse position than we were 3.5 years ago in terms of wait times to be seen at services. And then the quality and the ability to deliver quality care when people even get to the top of a waiting list. We've now got a situation where the national provider, which had, all of, not perfect, but had all of the expertise and experience within this field in this country, has been shut down, and 2 new services have been set up with far fewer clinicians, and none of whom have worked in gender previously. And so even if you waited your 4.5 plus years to be seen now, the clinicians that you'll be seeing won't be kind of expert in this field. And that kind of worries me greatly, really.
And do you think that will encourage or drive young people to private clinics like you while they wait for treatment on the NHS?
I mean, there's a reality to the fact that we are getting increasing numbers of referrals, and I guess we are the only under 18 independent gender service registered with the CQC. And so we are, one of those places that people are going, but we also recognise that by delivering the comprehensive holistic package of care that's listed out in the CAS review and NHS England documents, that comes at a great cost to families. And so many families just simply can't access that, don't have the resources, and are so forced to unregulated, unsafe spaces where they access treatment that's totally inappropriate and causes other problems down the line. So I think...
And that is happening, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We see it all the time. People coming to us, they've been elsewhere and things have gone really terribly wrong, and they still can't access the NHS for support to try to even unravel this. And so we are picking that up on a very regular basis to try and manage that situation. Not a situation we've been part of causing, but one that we're trying to help families manage.
And that's a generation of children who are stuck, whether they end up changing their gender identity or not.
Absolutely. There's 4 years lost since 2020, since this process has been going on. And sadly, I guess my concern is we can't waste another 4 years because, these new services aren't up and running properly yet. They're not seeing new cases, they're not well staffed enough. And so how much longer are we going to be waiting before these things actually get put in place?
Dr. Aidan Kelly. Well, our health editor, Hugh Pym, is with us now. Hugh, this report is being seen as a watershed moment. What has the reaction been to it today?
Well, Ben, pretty widespread in terms of welcoming the report. It's so comprehensive, nearly 400 pages, very detailed and measured analysis. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, said he praised the care and compassion shown by Dr. Cass, and he made the point that's already been made that extreme caution must be shown over long-term medical treatment, and that NHS England had made changes since the interim report, which had led to the ending of puberty blockers being routinely prescribed in England as of last month. Wes Streeting, Labour's health spokesman, also welcomed the report, but he said it raised serious concerns, quotes, that are pretty scandalous. He said that in an interview with The Sun, and he's questioned why there was weak evidence used to justify interventions and why clinicians had been silenced and felt the need not to come forward and get involved in the debate because of how toxic it was. So I think it means that this debate will continue. There'll be a lot of people digesting the report and both looking back to what went wrong and others wanting to look forward. And in terms of where we go from here, we've got NHS England saying they will implement a plan and take on board the recommendations, which will include a better service for 17 to 25-year-olds, moving from children's care through to adult care, better pathways for young children and their families to get involved at an early stage with a clinician to seek advice. But, of course, the proof of the pudding will be where are the resources for these extra clinics? We've got a new one in London and one in Liverpool. There'll be others created around England. The service also services Wales. But does NHS England have the wherewithal to deliver that, and how quickly can it be delivered? All questions still to be answered.
Thank you very much indeed. Hugh Pym, our health editor. Do get in touch with us on social media.